All right, welcome back to the channel. Bob Arum is getting blasted by Dana White of the UFC. Dana White says Bob Arum and Top Rank are going broke and that they have ruined the sport of boxing. Pretty ironic, I think. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. And before we get into the topic, which will be Bob Arum and Dana White, gotta love seeing two rich bald dudes fight. But I think Dana White made some really solid points about Bob Arum. And we're going to talk about that in this video. But before I do that, I want to take just a second to say thank you to everybody that supports the channel through watching the videos, this videos and the 4 videos that we upload pretty much every day of the week. Also, everybody that supports over there on the live streams we do, and also on Patreon. You guys really do make this channel go around and make it worth, getting up extra early in the morning before the job actually starts to record these things so that I can get the channel done and get my regular job done. So I really do very much appreciate you guys. So let's talk about what Dana White said. First, Dana White runs the UFC, right? So UFC is a organization of mixed martial artists, and they're doing an absolutely terrific job over the last I believe it's been a couple decades now of really growing what in many ways, it's not a new sport, but really, bringing the UFC to the forefront of the American public, American sports, and have really made for some very great moments as a fan of combat sports. Now, I don't pay attention to MMA on a daily basis. It's, I'm about as casual. I would call myself a casual MMA fan. If there's a big fight like Emmanuel Nunes is fighting, or, if Conor McGregor is fighting, or if there's some new star that people are saying, hey, Fanon, go check that out. Check this dude out. I'll definitely go do that. Looking forward to seeing Khabib back in the ring, back in the octagon, not the ring, right? That type of stuff. Would watch female MMA. So I think I like the UFC. I think they have a really good product but there has been a battle between the UFC and boxing in America for American fans for a while now. And as far as, like the majority population of the United States, which are Europeans, immigrants from Europe, the UFC has done a better job than boxing by and large over the last couple decades to really harness that fan base and to make it a profitable, to make the organizational profitable, or rather, make that organization attractive to that demographic. Boxing, less so, but that's not because a lot of effort hasn't been put forward trying to do that, because Bob Arum has definitely tried to compete with Dana White for that particular demographic. However, Bob Arum and Top Rank have failed miserably in that regard. So that is, but as a result, both Bob Arum and Dana White have gone back and forth a lot with each other with a bunch of insults. The latest bit has been over the UFC's attempt to continue to air fights in the middle of the pandemic, while Bob Arum is saying this dude's being a cowboy and just criticizing him for that decision. Dana White snaps back with, everybody right now knows, this is what Dana White is saying. Everybody knows that Bob Arum is, I think he called him a dickhead. I think that's what he called him. Let's see how far in the video I am on that. I don't know if that is obscene or not. I don't think it shouldn't be. But he called him that, and he said everybody knows that he's been in boxing his entire life, and he's bankrupt and he's ruining boxing. So when he said that Bob Arum was bankrupt, now obviously, or at least apparently, Bob Arum is not filed for bankruptcy. But what Dana White is saying is that Bob Arum doesn't have any money. And he had said before that Bob Arum in a lot of these smaller fights have to pay for these fights out of his own pocket because he's really not getting that much money for his licensing fees from ESPN. I think those are the type of fees that they're paying, right? Whatever the name of the rights that ESPN are purchasing from Top Rank to air those fights. Dana White is implying that it's not that much money. Now, the interesting thing is that you hear more and more Bob Arum talking about how he can't afford fights. So that's not something that is completely unfounded, because if you listen to what Bob Arum says about multiple Terrence Crawford fights, he says that they can't afford the guy. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for Terrence Crawford versus Mikey Garcia? Who's going to pay for Terrence Crawford versus Sean Porter, right? And in the conversations about the fight with Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., I'm not sure I've heard it exactly, right out of the mouth of Bob Arum, but Terrence Crawford says, it's about the money. It's about, making sure the timing is right so everybody can make sure that they get the money that they need out of it. And so that just seems to me that even in the fight with Terrence Crawford, that Bob Arum is hesitant to pull the trigger, man. He also complained, Bob Arum, about losing money, he losing money on the Terrence Crawford versus Amir Khan fight, which didn't do particularly well on pay-per-view. So you add to that the stress that you have now on pretty much all businesses in the United States. And I assume a lot of work, there's not a lot of pressure on all businesses, but there's a pressure on a lot of businesses. And there's definitely a lot of pressure right now on boxing promotional companies, because they have payroll. They have some amount of a payroll that they have to keep up, and expenses that they have, office expenses and things like they have, leases and things that they have to pay. But yet they don't have any real revenue coming in because you don't have the ability to make fights. So that is going to also stress Bob Arum even more. So I think that there is definitely a risk for Bob Arum. There's also been stated, on multiple occasions by people that, not all of these promotional companies are going to get out of this, are going to come back off this pandemic. They're the local ones. Depending on how their agreements are written and how, what they have to pay, whether or not they're ever able to get out of certain things that they might have to pay for and minimize their expenses. A lot of these guys might not be around. And I don't think that's a scenario with Bob Arum, because he has that ESPN contract and because he's been around so long. He should have enough and be able to survive the hump. But I do believe what Dana White is saying about this money is a major problem for Bob Arum, because Bob Arum keeps saying it. Now, as far as this ruining boxing stuff, man, dogs you preaching to the choir there, Dana White. Bob Arum has definitely put a hurting on the sport of boxing, in my opinion, for the same reason that I mentioned earlier with the UFC. This guy is as the main promoter I think as far as promoters themselves in the United States. Bob Arum is the top promoter right now. PBC is the top outfit without a doubt, because they've got the most fighters. They've got a big contract with 2 networks. They're doing very well, but from the outside looking in, they're doing very well. But Bob Arum, as just the person, actual promotional organization, has definitely been the most influential since 1980, where, Don King, definitely in the 90s, into the 90s, when Don King started, slipping off a little bit more into like a semi-retirement. But the reason that I say that Bob Arum, if he didn't ruin it, dude, he definitely set American boxing back. And that's primarily because of his refusal to promote American fighters. Like, Bob Arum and HBO both went on this thing where they were going to push the Eastern European fighter. Now, I believe that the reason that they decided that they were going to push the Eastern European fighter was to attract fans that they think would be interested in Eastern European fighters. And those would be European American fight fans. But the problem is, that the European American or the white fight fan is not going for it. They're just not going for it. And Dana White gave them a product that has some advantages over boxing. One of the main advantages that they have is that because they're all in one organization, all of these, at least from the outside looking in, again, as a casual fan, their top fighters fight each other. I mean, just the women the fighters that I like are like the women. So you had Ronda Rousey fought Amanda Nunes. She fought Holly Holmes. Nunes fought Holly Holmes, fought Cyborg, fought Ronda Rousey. Cyborg fought Amanda Nunes and Holly Holmes. I'm sure there's also that what is her name? I can't remember. It's another Eastern European, like Shashevsky. I want to say Shashevsky, but you know who I'm talking about. Another very good fighter up there who's mixing it up with people. But you can't get that in boxing because you guys like Bob Arum that want to have in-house fights and build up fighters in ways where their first 20 fights, nothing that's of no significance. Terrence Crawford still, to this day, has not had a significant fight in his career. Lomachenko was, oh my God, man. Lomachenko was definitely more, even though he's a very good fighter, that garbage that was going on there at 130 pounds, the dude didn't even fight. He fought 130 pounder, and that 130 pounder was a journeyman. But they keep trying to push this on American fans, and American fans aren't buying it. Meanwhile, you have just enough good fighters, and since you refuse to do, in-house fights, since you primarily do in-house fights, the best fighters can't fight each other. And Bob Arum, I do believe, is a major part of that problem. And especially since he went through this kind of mini Cold War with the PBC. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting observation from Dana White. Wanted to share it with you. You let me know what you think in the comment section. I wouldn't ask you to speculate on whether Bob Arum's going broke or not, but because it's obvious that everybody's in financial pressure. But did the dude do a job on the sport of boxing during the time that he's been one of the main promoters? You let me know in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.